Well, with that advertised change, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Catherine Bateson from the University of Kent. Catherine, as you'll hear, is an expert on the American Civil War, and she's going to talk to us about Irish involvement in that conflict. It's one of a number of civil wars that we've touched on in the course of the program this weekend, and in particular, the legacy of Irish involvement through music and through song. Another one of the sort of the aftermathy components of what we've been talking about, the echoes, I suppose, of Irish engagement in a conflict on the other side of the Atlantic. So looking forward to what Catherine has to say, and with renewed gratitude for her flexibility on the matter of timing. Over to you.
That's all right. Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Oh, good. Okay, I should say, before I get going, a huge thank you to the West Cork History Festival, to Victoria, to Simon, Breda, all the organisers. It's been a brilliant festival weekend, and I've never been to this part of Ireland before. I should say from the off, I'm a historian of America, really. I dabble with the Irish Americans, and my travel to the island of Ireland has been very limited to capital cities, so it's really lovely to come here. It was really beautiful in a different way yesterday, but this is much more familiar to English weather, so thank you for having me. So, as the United States reunited at the end of the American Civil War in 1865, and the nation began to look to its future reconciled prosperity, a grandmother sat in her rocking chair in New York City, relieved from work each happy hour is spent. She was Mrs. Malloy, mother to one Pat Malloy, a fictional Irishman depicted in two ballads produced during and after the conflict. Pat's mother appears only in the second ballad, called Return of Pat Malloy, and the final verse portrayed this grandmother, Mrs. Malloy, sitting carefree in her chair in a house where, according to the song's lyrics, her children pay the rent. How nice for her. Her family surrounded her, including Pat Malloy's son, named Young Pat after his father. This older migrant to the United States now spent her days with her grandson on her knee as she sings a good old Irish song to him while he sits there. She sings and talks and plays with him both morning, noon, and night. The song went on to conclude, all settled in her new American residence. So placed in the American home setting, Return of Pat Malloy highlighted what the United States had come to represent to members of the Irish diaspora who resided in the nation by the middle of the 19th century. During the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, some 200,000 Irish-born fought for the Union and Confederate causes. About 180,000 Irish-born fought for the Union, so the northern states. That figure has changed in about the 10 years I've been doing my research. It used to be kind of a much more conservative 150,000. It's probably actually above 180,000. That's continually being reassessed. And about 20,000 fought for the Confederacy who were Irish-born. That's indicative partly because there were fewer Irish settling in the southern states. The vast majority go north. And also partly to do with the fact that their support for Confederate secession over slavery was far more muted. So you've got about, let's go for the newest estimate, 200,000 Irish-born fighting for the Union Confederacy, plus an even greater and slightly unquantifiable number of second and third generation born men born in North America to Irish-born parents and grandparents who also joined the ranks and who had been settling in the country for decades. Of course, countless more were not just experiencing life on the front line in the army and in the navy during the war, they're also experiencing it on the home front with their families residing in the warring states. And although a lot of the main bulk of the American diaspora are actually kept away from the front line, they're mostly all in New York, and Pennsylvania has a few key battles, but they're still experiencing the kind of depredations that come for 4 years of the conflict. Now, the eponymous Pat Malloy, who appeared in both the song Pat Malloy that was written about 1860-61, right at the start of the war, and then Return of the Pat Malloy, which I've mentioned before, which comes out about 1865-66. According to the ballad lyric story, he migrated from Ireland to America across the seas to roam, to work, and to send every shilling I get to his family in America. Most of both ballads is sung from his first-person experience. Eventually, he returned to his birthplace. He comes back to Ireland in the second song, to bring his fiancée Molly over with him, and his mother too. I bet Molly was thrilled at that, that she had to come back with that. That's not in the song, that's a whole other song that should have been written. And they bring back, I'll return to the return of Pat Malloy later on. Now, countless of his brethren also did likewise, many of them migrating during the Great Famine years, particularly for America, but also for wider North America, including Canada, between that 1845 and 52 peak of the famine. Approximately over that period, 1.5 million Irish migrants go across the Atlantic. And they were followed by steady waves of men, women, and children to American shores throughout the rest of the 1850s. We often sometimes stop the migration at the end of the famine, but actually that's carrying on through the 1850s and through the 1860s. The Civil War doesn't really cause much of a hindrance to that. And all these migrant communities all worked and settled and fought in their new American homeland. They are the real strong foundation of the Irish-American diaspora as it becomes then later on in the 19th century. Now, additionally, throughout this period, the experiences of this Irish-American diaspora group were written into song, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. There are approximately, in just 4 years of conflict, 11,000 songs written during the war, with over 200 directly or indirectly relating to the Irish involvement on the front line and the home front. That is disproportionate to the number of actually who are fighting. So they are their own kind of subgenre of American Civil War songs. Now, of these, several sang directly about how America had become an Irish home nation, and that its cities and regions were now homes to live in and defend, while Confederate secession over slavery's future in America threatened to break up the concept of the United States. As the conflict came to a close, these songs reflected how willing the Irish diaspora was to help and build and shape the country after 1865, which, I mean, I'm talking more about the diaspora strands for this weekend's stuff, but that also ties into the aftermath theme of this festival as well. And these sentiments have been the focus of my book that you can see there on the screen, Irish-American Civil War Songs, Identity, Loyalty, and Nationhood. It's published back in October 2022 by LSU Press. It's nearly 2 years old. It's available in all good online and in-person bookshops. So I'm going to share some of the kind of main reflections from the book in relation to how the diaspora's lyrical articulation of the American home came to be through these songs. And I'm, spoiler alert, actually going to start where I conclude the book, which is that Irish-American songs produced in the Union States, or in those kind of northern main states of America, in particular during the conflict, articulated expressions of American home identity to a significant extent. This was part of another overall main lyrical message, stressing Irish loyalty to the nation on the battlefield and the home front, running counter to some of the misconceptions about the Irish-American experience in the period. For example, one lyric in a song called War Song of the New York 69th Regiment, sung from the perspective of New York's Irish soldiers marching to war, gave the cry, "Then forward for our homes and altars all we hold most dear." And this rousing sentiment was designed to rally other members of the diaspora to fight and to support the Union cause. They were marching to fight for and to defend all that they held closest to them, in this case, their families residing in American homes. And this should stand to reason when you think about the fact that many immigrants had actually been in America for several decades, and sometimes it was years, decades, in some cases generations, before the 1860s. All the way back, actually, Irish migration to America had gone all the way back from the colonial period, so all the way back into the 1600s. If you want to count them as part of it, often by historians they're counted as separate. The Scots-Irish diaspora, its own group, had been right there from the very beginnings and makings of the American colonies. The predominantly Catholic famine migrants of the 1840s and 50s had also been resident in the country for at least a decade before Confederate secession, and fighting then broke out. Or Confederate secession starts in December of 1860, the fighting breaks out by April of 1861. So they all established families and livelihoods for years, and while they retained a sense of cultural Irish heritage, such as Mrs. Malloy teaching her grandson and passing on those traditions by telling him songs while he's on her knee, They also expressed American identity because they'd come to share an inherent sense and association with the nation by the 1860s, which is also going in that classic kind of the same way it's happening across Europe in that period, that own kind of revival and change of nationalism and national identity through, not just through civil war, but through its politics as well. So the Irish and the American Union during the Civil War fought and contributed to the cause because, as I said before, they were defending their home nation and they're invested in their home nation's future. The same is true in reverse for those who are fighting in the Confederate causes. So they're also singing about it and defending their Confederate homes, or the Southern homes as well. And it's through these lyrics that Irish-American identity formation really comes to the fore. Now, the Irish who serve and fight in the Union Army during the war began depicting and singing about the United States as their home nation and place of residence from the very earliest days of the conflict. In May of 1861, members of the Irish-dominant 69th New York State Militia, formed by Irish-born and descended men from New York City's largest diaspora population, this slightly changes through the rest of the 19th century, but in the 1860s, New York City is really the home of the Irish-American diaspora, with Boston and Philadelphia as its two kind of subsects, and then eventually it moves more to Boston and more to Chicago. But the New York State Militia had been formed from way back in the kind of late 1830s, early 1840s, by members of the diaspora, and this militia is already good to go. So it immediately offers up its services to the Union cause when Lincoln calls for troops in April of 1861. Within days of mustering and preparing to march to the Union defense, this ballad appears. This is Glorious 69th, or at least it's the top of Glorious 69th. Lots of these song sheets don't actually show up very well on PowerPoint, so I've zoomed in on a little bit of it for you. And this is one of the very first written about the Irish wartime experience. Its lyrics was to be sung from the perspective of one of the militia's Irish soldier members. And several lines describe about what it was like leaving his New York City home. He depicted the militia's mobilization, the march down Broadway. If you've ever been to New York, they go all the way down Broadway, through the city and embark onto boats. If you've ever been to New York City, it's the bit right at the end, what effectively is now Castle Point. That used to be the entryway into New York before before the Liberty Island, where Statue of Liberty is, and before Ellis Island was built. They came in right at the very end of the battery of New York. So they march all the way down there, and they embark onto boats that go southwards towards Maryland and towards the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. And so the singing soldier offers up a farewell unto New York as they go. The soldier then goes on in this song to sing how it fills my heart with pity to leave its sylvan shore, a grand, lyrical, sentimental expression that paints New York City in a poetic, heartfelt light. And some of you may have been to New York City and think, really? But yeah, he thought it was this nice. Yet for all the seeming lament about having to leave this New York home to go to war, the singing Glorious Ninth volunteer told audiences that he was leaving because, as the lyrics said, our president, that's Lincoln, commanded us to sail another way, namely towards the capital, and that's where the 69th New York State Militia arrive. Once there, they take up their new residence around Arlington Heights, outside of the city. If you've ever been to D.C., they're based. Arlington Cemetery used to be the Confederate General Robert E. Lee's home. He obviously leaves it when secession happens. The Union take it over. It becomes a military encampment. It's actually one of the reasons why the cemetery ends up there. It was a plantation house. And the RA-69th are kind of, there's only a plaque now on a road that's several streets behind where the cemetery now is. But they're up there. They're defending Washington, D.C. from any potential attack from the south. And they spend a few weeks there preparing to meet the Confederates, eventually doing so in the first major battle of the Civil War on the 21st of July, 1861, which is the first battle of Bull Run, which takes place close to the nearby Virginian railway town of Manassas, Virginia. It's only now about half an hour or so by train. Now, the unknown lyricist of Glorious 69th could not have foreseen the outcome of what happened at Bull Run when this particular ballad was penned just a few weeks before it occurred. Many of the militia fought during the battle, and many fought bravely. Some were imprisoned, wounded, or killed. They lost a few of their Irish-born commanders through injury and imprisonment, one of whom I'm going to come back to in a bit. Those who survived then returned to New York City before the unit became subsumed into a newly established full-blown regiment. They upgrade from a militia. And they become the founding part of the Union Army's official and famed Irish Brigade during the war, which was eventually made up of 3 New York regiments, one from Boston, Massachusetts, but they're mostly Boston men, and one from Pennsylvania. Glorious 69th, this song concludes by describing how the returning soldiers to New York City would, and this is preempting what might have happened in Bull Run, embrace their families as they returned to our children and wives, who they would hold in our arms both day and night. These now future battle-hardened veterans ended up the song by hoping that Confederate secession is all played out in America and that civil conflict would not tear the nation apart again. Now, the following year, one of several ballads that are written specifically about the newly formed Irish Brigade gave further reason for Irish wartime service. The Irish Brigade, and I've got to say, and this is a nightmare writing the book, there are about 10 songs just called Irish Brigade or The Irish Brigade. They're very imaginative in the 1860s with their titles. They're all different. But this particular Irish Brigade song had on its song sheet that it was written with words and music by an Irishman. And it was published in a union-produced songbook, so a whole group of songs together, called The Continental Songster. Now, this whole book presented very pro-American sentiments that are kind of in all of the songs. This particular Irish Brigade song does the same thing, but with an Irish accent. The lyrics described that the Union forever was to be the diaspora's war cry, extolled by those who were fighting until their last dying breath. The song also told the diaspora to let the stars and stripes henceforth be your boast, with the flag embodying the ideals of a nation and symbolizing their American loyalty. And very quickly early on, the Irish really latch on to the stars and stripes as the symbol in which to fight for. This metaphor was emphasized further by the following line, and the Union forever was to be the Irishman's toast. Now, Irish-American Civil War songs often use the American national flag as their symbolic image of home, and these lyrical articulations strengthened the bond Irish migrants had with their new homeland nation. In 1862, the music hall performer Kathleen O'Neill wrote, and she actually, sometimes lyricists used to adopt female personas in the hope that it might sell their songs better, but Kathleen O'Neill really did exist. So she wrote and produced No Irish Need Apply. Now, this was one of several contemporaneous ballads with the same title again, in response to the anti-Catholic, very nativist, anti-Catholic Irish sentiment that saw sections of nativist American society attempt to restrict migrant employment and success. I'm sure you're familiar with this phrasing. It had come across from America, originally from London and across the Atlantic, and was informing the kind of anti-Catholic sentiment through the 1850s, and you could still hear it in the 1860s. So there are lots of references to No Irish Need Apply in the war. This is a bit of a tangent, I think I've got time for it. There's a ballad that's actually written, What Irish Boys Can Do, with the subtitle, Answer to No Irish Need Apply. It's the same sort of sentiment. Anyway, in O'Neill's version, she praised the United States for welcoming her and letting her contribute to the nation through her successful employment on the stage. She offered up in the song her own personal display of American Union devotion and thanks to the country, now that I'm in the land of the glorious and free. Her American dedication extended, stating, proud I am to own it, it is a country dear to me, singing about how the American nation belongs to her. Indeed, so committed to America and the Union was O'Neill that she hoped that the Union may ever be a pattern for the world and for the home of liberty, to inspire future generations of immigrants who would make their home in America during the second half of the 19th century. The following year, this song comes about about the middle of the war in 1862 or so. In 1863, the ballad Corcoran's Irish Legion echoed the same sentiments, again stressing how the wider diaspora were committed to the American Union. The music hall performer and songwriter Eugene T. Johnston, who composed several wartime ballads that sang of the Irish experience, wrote Corcoran's Irish Legion in honor of the Irish-dominated New York regiments who had formed in 1863 that year as part of what was known as Corcoran's Legion during the middle of the conflict. Their leader was one General Michael Corcoran, originally from County Sligo. He's actually a descendant of the Irish 17th century hero Patrick Sarsfield. And Corcoran had joined the 69th New York State Militia, back when it was a militia, not long after he migrated to the United States in the 1840s. And he rises through the militia's ranks. He's a colonel at the time of when secession breaks out. He's a colonel when he goes to the first Battle of Bull Run with them. And he is infamously, he's captured by Confederate forces at Bull Run. And he spends 13 months between July of 1861 and August of 1862 in various prison holdings in the southern states. He refuses to take oaths of allegiance and abeyance, saying he wasn't going to fight the Confederacy. He wanted revenge. So he hung out in there in prisons just to make a point until his release. When Corcoran finally does come back, and this is Corcoran here on his horse, illustrated at the first Battle of Run, right before he comes off of the horse and gets captured. He's injured and then he's captured. The Corcoran set about, when he comes back, organising a de facto Irish brigade so that more of the cities and also wider New York State's diaspora sons could serve in ethnic Irish units. Johnston's song then was written about this new military leadership for Corcoran and his men, and its lyrics stressed and reinforced to American society that they were as loyal and committed to fighting for the Union cause and keeping the country united, just as their fellow Irish regimental brethren elsewhere in the Army and Navy. And this is quite key because it's coming in 1863, around the same time as only some members, I should stress, of the New York City Irish diaspora are busy rioting and protesting about the draft and about forthcoming abolition. So this is a kind of, you could say propaganda, or you could say it's actually a genuine reassessment sentiment about their loyalty. Now, like O'Neill's No Irish Need Apply song, Corcoran's Irish Legions had singing soldiers in it, and it stated, like O'Neill, that the flag we love and by it we'll stand, pledging their own loyalty to the Star-Spangled Banner. They would remain in military service till the bonds of rebellion we sever and peace is restored to our dear adopted land, which revealed the Legion's desire to see Confederate secession end. They had joined the war effort, as the lyrics clearly stated, to fight for our home, our dear adopted land. They loved that phrase about the adopted land of America. Now, this is where I'm going to go into a little bit tangent about Michael Corcoran, because I love him, and I very rarely get to do this. So General Michael Corcoran was also a man who personally embodied and believed and articulated those same sentiments. Over the 12 years or so that he had lived in the United States before the conflict began, the country to him had truly become his home nation. This was apparent in the way in which he wrote regularly about America, not Ireland, being his home. At the same time as he set about establishing the Legion named after him in 1863, Corcoran also published a brief account of his time in various Confederate prisoner of war holdings throughout the southern states. He's held in more than one prison. And the memoir was full of rhetorical references and statements about his American homeland. For instance, Corcoran described how my heart constantly yearned for home while he was imprisoned. This was most apparent when he was being moved to different prisons from Virginia down into the Carolinas, effectively further southwards into the Confederate States and further away from the north and from his New York City home. He noted that the greater the distance from the latter, in other words, New York, the greater that became, the stronger the tie that still held me to it. So the home he's describing is in New York and not in his County Sligo birthplace. Certain instances enhance this association when I received letters from friends at home, again meaning New York City and not his family and friends remaining in Ireland. New York City was also where Corcoran's first wife was, Elizabeth, as well as his close friends, which included many of the Irish-American diaspora's elite members who worked to free him from his Confederate holdings. So while he's resisting taking oaths and pledges not to fight the Confederacy, all his friends are busy fundraising to try and bargain to get him back. Now, Corcoran's joy at returning to his home city in the summer of 1863, some 15 months after leaving it with the 69th New York State Militia before Bull Run, was tantamount in the final pages of his memoir. Relating his boat journey back to New York City after he was released from being a prisoner of war, he commented, "As my eyes fell on its bright stars and stripes," talking about the American flag, at the harbour, my soul thrilled to its centre. Within that homely construct was his New York City, where all his friends and loved ones, as he described, sprang up before my eyes like an enchanting vision. Effectively, Corcoran was endorsing the concept that home is where the heart is. Family and hearth are more important than birthplace. And his fellow Irish brethren in the diaspora likely agreed. New York City itself goes into jubilant rapture at this Irish-born general's return. In fact, in the report of the event, Harper's New Monthly magazine illustrated the utmost enthusiasm which the city felt as this Irishman and a New Yorker, that's how they describe him, he's actually honoured with the title of being a New Yorker, which is a rare thing, had come back from such a long imprisonment. And I can't emphasize this enough, it's actually very rare. To be captured at the beginning of the Civil War and then spend 13 months of imprisonment is actually unheard of. The long prison sentences where prisoners are going to the horrible prisons of Andersonville and Liberty Prison and all of these prisons, that happens much later in the war. So Corcoran is a bit of an anomaly here. So it's a big deal. The periodical went on and said that he had suffered not only for himself, but the nation looked to his person, making him, they stated, the typical Union soldier in captivity, although he's a little bit extra typical. Indeed, Corcoran's personal experiences of his devotion and home ties correlate with this overall image of the Irish-American Union Army commander as a loyal and gallant Irish-American heroic patriot serving his country. And the reason I'm giving you all this background on Corcoran is not just because I love him, it's actually because his dedication and his commitment to the military fight against the Confederacy were recurring examples and expressions heard in Irish wartime ballads. Corcoran has a lot of songs written about him. One other example, as well as Corcoran's Irish Legion that I've mentioned, was a song called Corcoran's Ball, which was a take on the very popular traditional tune of Lanigan's Ball from the middle of the 19th century. So Corcoran's Ball is written in 1863. It's written by an Irish songwriter called John Mahone, who portrayed Corcoran as an ultimate faithful American officer. Aimed at the whole nation, one verse exclaimed, "You've all heard of General Michael Corcoran," well, you have all now, "the true son of Erin, so brave in the strife, the national cause he ever was a worker in, and the Union to him was more precious than life. When dastard secession raised its dark crest, upon this glorious country he answered her call." Now, Corcoran was not the only Irish-born Civil War soldier who had come to see the United States as a home by the time of the conflict. One of the most famous at the time was a man called James Shields, who was a Democrat. He was a 3-time senator. He's actually in the pantheon of political stats and Christmas quiz questions. He's the only 3-time senator to represent 3 different US states. He liked his job. And he was a Union Army general as well. He'd migrated, he's much, much older than the rest of the guys in the Civil War. He migrated in the 1820s, so he's actually a real veteran by the time the war comes around. Originally, Shields was from County Tyrone, and he had turned into a career American politician and military figure. He was a national name from the 1840s onwards. He fights during the Mexican-American War in the mid-1840s. And he's called out of his peaceful retirement in California to serve in the Western theaters of the war, leading a few regiments for a time as well. It's hoped that he might become the Irish Brigade's general. That was the original plan, but he thought, no, I'm too old for it. I'm just going to go for a few skirmishes out west. That seemed to suit him fine. I think it's because he decided to live in California for a few years and didn't really want to leave the heat. Now, when Shields died in 1879, the lyricist Daniel Moran penned Lamentation of General James Shields in his honor. This ballad obituary sang about how Shields had migrated to America when 16 years old and for his adopted country fought vigorously and bold, just like his other members of the brethren of the diaspora. The song continued by noting how Shields had proved to be a true citizen to the country that had been his home now for almost 50 years. On battlefields, on debating floors, all across the country, Shields had fought a hard battle for the United States. He was thus lamented as a key figure of the 19th century assimilated Irish migrant society. As a quick caveat, it could have gone horribly wrong for Shields. Shields once threatened a certain Illinois lawyer to a duel. It doesn't actually happen, but that lawyer went on to be Abraham Lincoln. So might have been a totally different story for Shields. Now, Fictional, those are the real guys. Corcoran, Shields, there's a few others. If you've ever heard of Thomas Francis Meagher, if you want questions about Thomas Francis Meagher, I'll take the questions. I'm not going to go on a tangent about him. Those guys are the famous ones. There are also fictional ones, and they get illustrated. These are a couple of just sort of zoomed in bits from particular Irish American song sheets. You get lots of fictional figures appearing in songs too. So you've got Pat Malloy and his family I've already mentioned. And they also are used in song to sing about their American home association. One other fictional song is the brilliantly named Mickey O'Flaherty, who appeared in a song Off for a Soldier, which was produced around the middle of the war, again in 1863, a big year for a song publication. And in this lyrical story, O'Flaherty marched with the boys till rebellion is done in the southern states, with the stars and stripes floating over my head. In a mock Irish brogue, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to be insulting, O'Flaherty told his wife that why he went to war. He said, "Peggy, you know I must help save the country that affords me protection and gives me my bread," making the rhetorical point that the American home nation had cared for him and fed him, and so it seemed only right to repay this debt and aid the country in her hour of wartime need. Now, before going to the war, the fictional O'Flaherty would then, or by going to the war, the fictional O'Flaherty would return a hero and would be pointed at as America's pride by people in the streets, the song claimed, as he was to be an honoured veteran who, when called upon, had defended his homeland of migrants with pride. And furthermore, the lyrics described how O'Flaherty understood the severity of the civil conflict that he was fighting for, stressing that he would not come back to his family and give a kiss for his wife and his children 3 until the Confederate traitors had fired their last gun at the flag of the free. So again, here's another example to emulate. There's also a ballad written called Save the Constitution. A lyricist called Timothy B. O'Regan writes this quite early on in the conflict. It's actually written and dedicated on the song sheet to the Irish Dominant Regiment of the 9th Connecticut Volunteers. There's a kind of a sub-diaspora enclave up in Connecticut. And likewise, it's singing about the unit's commitment to the Union cause and the fight to keep the country united. In its final verse, O'Regan described what would happen when peace once more will bless this shore for what it was intended. The advancement of American liberty, of democracy and prosperity will flourish. The Connecticut Irish, as well as the whole country, would then contribute to domestic and international trade and commerce. It's the only time that appears in a Civil War song. There's not many songs about trade and commerce. National economic and social developments that will be revived once the Civil War is ended, the song said. Now, of course, like many civil conflicts, the American Civil War is often seen as one where you have the brother against the brother, families ripping themselves apart at the same time as tearing the country asunder. Irish Americans occasionally exemplified this particular problem with their wartime cultural outputs. Contemporary songs occasionally exhibited remorse about how fighting encounters brought harm to island sons across the front line. Lyrics in the 1863 ballad Pat Murphy of Mars Brigade voiced momentary apprehension that it was a shame for to see brothers fighting in such a queer manner. Other songs, particularly those published on the other side of the Atlantic, so in Ireland and the British Isles, also particularly echoed these concerns. And this is where we get a little bit local. So, for example, the song, the top of the bigger kind of top of the song sheet that you can see there on the left, is from our brave Irish champions. It was written very early on in the war in 1863. It was written by Thomas Walsh, and I say it's local because it was published nearby in Cork. It's the only Irish published song that I can actually identify to where it was actually published as well. And it, like all the songs published in Ireland about the war, they follow much more conventional 18th century broadside style. So basically they're using songs, as songs had always traditionally been going all the way back to the classical period, of basically telling the events, particularly of conflicts, basically spreading the news. These are used as like kind of news reports. So our brave Irish champions, like all Irish written songs over here as well, are full of fake news because they're writing them so quick they haven't actually kept up to date. What Thomas Walsh kills off several generals and commanders at Bull Run who did not die. In fact, actually, one of them lives a very long, very successful military career after the war. not successful if you're the indigenous Americans he goes and kills in the West after the war, but so Walsh is getting his facts wrong. But anyway, he tries. So our brave Irish champions starts with a pretty accurate opening, saying, "I hope you'll pay attention and listen unto me." That's how I should have started this paper. "The great battle in America to you I will explain. On the 21st of July, there were 20,000 slain." He's talking about the first Bull Run. And Walsh's ballad went on to report to those in Ireland after the battle that many a valiant Irishman lay bleeding on the plain at Manassas, which had become a scene of horrid slaughter that day. It had become the place where, the song said, the 69th brave Irishmen, sort of the 69th New York State Militia, were near all cut away. Now that's not true. The vast majority of them actually survived, but like I said, Walsh likes killing off people for the sake of it. The following year, you then get a new song on the last battle fought in America. You can tell they're published in Ireland because they're always kind of more newsy titles, much longer titles than the American ones. And this one sang about the brutal Battle of Shiloh in April 1862. It's the only battle of the Civil War that doesn't have two names. If you don't know this, American Civil War battles often have two names. So the First Battle of Bull Run is known in the Confederacy as the First Battle of Manassas. They altered what they called them depending on whether it was a town or a river. But Shiloh was so horrific for everybody, they just called it Shiloh. And when this was published in Ireland, its lyrics, a new song on the last battle of fought in America, evoked the same emphasizing devastating effect that was being had on families beyond the diaspora and back across the ocean in Ireland. It said, "The loss on both sides is great. The dead lay in heaps like shorn wheat belonging to each army. Fully 30,000 men or more left wives and orphans to deplore, and friends behind on Erin's shore, lamenting that dreadful mourning." Now, mourning is spelled as in morning, as opposed to afternoon, but you can also read it, putting a U in it, to also mean mourning as grief. The following year again, you can just see kind of a brief little bit of it, the top of it on the right of the screen. In 1863, you have another Irish island-produced song called A Lamentation on the American War. It expressed similarly mournful scenes with a depiction of the dead at the awful Battle of Vicksburg, which had culminated after several, actually about 2 months of Union besiegement on the Mississippi town. It culminates on the 4th of July, 1863. It's an Independence Day present from General Grant to Lincoln. Comes literally the day after the ending of the Battle of Gettysburg, which is probably one of the most famous battles of the war. The song noted how old Erin's flag was hoisted on both sides and by Irish hearts. And actually, it's one of the rarest ones where it directly sings about the fact that there's Irish involvement on both sides. But this fighting reality came at a considerable and personal familial cost. Heaps of Irish heroes, brave on the plains there lay, that was both killed and wounded there, all in, if you want to get it to rhyme properly, America. Some thousands here do lie, far away from their native clay, their bones lie mouldering with the dust along Columbia's shore. Lamentation on American Civil War has one of my favorite few lines in a song. It actually describes mothers in Ireland running down to the village post office to see notices coming in from the shipping to see who had been killed from this battle as well. It's a very, very beautiful kind of imagery song. Now, if anyone's got any questions about Irish nationalism, as this is a whole tangent I can't go into, there is a consequence of this. If they're fighting each other, this is going to mean that the training ground that the war is perceived to be by some Fenians is not going so well because they're getting injured or they're dying, and so there's not going to be as many people left to come back to Ireland to fight, which they are also singing about occasionally. But if anyone's got any questions about that later, I'll take them. What I will stress here, though, is that despite these lyrics sort of lamenting about the fact they're fighting, there is no indication in any of the sentiments that this caused any hesitation or altered Irish-American military service. In fact, killing indiscriminately, regardless of who was the opposition and where they came from, was an attitude actively encouraged by Irish generals and members of the diaspora, both in speeches, on the battlefield, and also in songs. And in fact, if anything, they're actually kind of much more vocal about this than their German or even Native American-born compatriots. One example of this, and I always think this is the most beautiful little illustration from a songbook. This is Song for the Irish Brigade. It's an early Confederate wartime ballad written in New Orleans in late 1861. It's written to, it's a fake Irish brigade. There is no official Confederate Irish brigade. You could read it as this is also a message to those in the Union as well. Because it included lyrics directly aimed at the Union's Irish ranks, who the song said were knaves and snakes for stopping Confederate secession. It believed that the North Irish Brigade, forming at the end of that year, needed trouncing as dastard Yankees, Bateson Hollow, so showing that they viewed them as Americans. The true Irish heroes, according to this song, were the stalwart Celtic race of the Irish-American Southerners who would, from their battle place, charge at dastard Yankees. So it didn't really care that it was fight. They wanted to go and get the Northern Irish Americans. Among the Confederate ranks, the Irish green shall be seen, billowing with a burning wind from the south behind, which would cause the Yankees to rout before it. It's a sentiment that County Cork's own Confederate-born Confederate officer Patrick Claiborne would no doubt have supported. Has anyone heard of Patrick Claiborne? I'm always interested if no one knows. A couple of you. So Claiborne is really the only major Southern Irish-born general. Claiborne has like Shields, has a long military career. He goes and joins the British Army. He goes all the way out to India, has this huge career with the British Army, comes back to Ireland, decides he's had enough of the British Army, moves across to America. He settles in Arkansas, has a nice life there, and then joins the Confederate cause, not for the defense of slavery, but more for the defense of the Confederate home nation, although slavery, of course, is tied into that. For those of you who know Claiborne, does anybody know why he's infamous in the Confederacy? He suggests something really radical. He suggests, because he clocks very early on, he's an experienced military man, that they are running out of men. There's a smaller population of white men in the South, and he says that they're going to have to do one thing and one thing only if they're going to keep the war going, which is to arm slaves. But if you're going to arm slaves, you have to make them citizens, which means you end slavery, there you destroy the Confederate mission. Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, hated this idea, obviously, and so stops Claiborne rising higher up the ranks. As far as I know, Claiborne only appears in a collective song about lots of Confederate generals. He doesn't get his own song dedicated to him. So while he's very famous in the South, unlike Corcoran and other compatriots like Thomas Francis Meagher, he doesn't have that many lyrics written about him, but he is from the region, so I thought I'd give him a bit of a shout out. Now, as a kind of by way of a conclusion, as a handful of these lyric examples have shown, the concept and understanding of the United States as an Irish home ran throughout contemporary Irish-American Civil War songs, where real and fictional Irishmen were used to highlight how well-established migrant communities were in the United States. And so to return to Pat Malloy, these two ballads are kind of indicative of this. They're both written for and popular with American music hall attendees in the mid-19th century. And that, of course, includes members of the diaspora who had come to become integrated by the Civil War era. Across both of the songs, it is possible for audiences in these music halls to hear and to trace and become familiar with the fictional Pat Malloy's transition. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, throughout the verses, Pat Malloy returns to Ireland after he establishes himself in American society. He raises enough money to bring back his family with him, and then also has enough to look after his mother. So not only is he bring them across, he's also, as I mentioned, paying the rent for his mother as well. So she's not having to earn. In addition, the ballad refrains alter to show how his home had moved from Ireland to America. Across both songs, listeners are told that old Ireland is my country, and this continues to the very last line of Return of Pat Malloy, where the notion of Ireland being his home completely disappears from the lyrics together. Instead, it was new America that now took on that mantle and identity. So Irish-American Civil War songs provide one of the clearest contemporary popular and public articulations of the American Union being, and the United States more broadly, as being an Irish diaspora home nation. The reason that Irish-born descended soldiers fought for the country, adopted its ideals, upheld and bled for the flag, was because they were manifestations of their American homeland. It was their home that was ultimately being fought for and sung about during the conflict. And as demonstrated, the constant collective association of viewing the United States as the Irish-American home in writings and lyrics reveal how an inherent sense of Americanness pervaded the diaspora's understanding of their place in the country by the mid-19th century. Thank you very much for listening, and I take any questions that you might possibly have.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And it's going to be interesting because in the next contribution, we'll be talking about John Mitchell, who was also involved, of course, in the Confederacy, but took a very different view to General Claiborne, which no doubt we'll have a chance to pick up with Tom Keneally.
Have you done any comparisons between the songs sung by Irish expats in the American Army with Italian regiments and the German regiments and various other ethnic regiments?
Yeah.
And are they similar?
Yes, particularly the Germans. So ones about the Italians are not written by them. They're all written by musical performers trying to mimic them. Whether with the Irish and the Germans, you get a mixture. You've got people mimicking, but then you've also got their actual German Americans and Irish Americans writing too. And yes, the Germans are similarly very much like, yay, America, this is America. They constantly, in their letters, are often in the big battles near each other. So they're constantly writing about each other. So they're swapping ideas and things as well. And so, yeah, they're very similar. So it kind of, there's an argument in Civil War history that, you know, certain periods of conflict really shape American identity. The first big one is the War of 1812, and then the Civil War becomes something else. And it's interesting is the immigrant groups really like adopting a lot of that identity that then is filtering into the other groups that they are serving with and borrowing. So yeah, they're very comparable. Of course, there are far more German Americans in the war as well. They're a much bigger diaspora at that point. But it's interesting that they're sharing the same ideals. The Germans, though, tend to write more of their songs still in German, which is a slight different thing. There are Irish language phrases that crop up in a lot of these Civil War songs. There are a few Fenian songs written, which are, there's one publication, it's got one page in English and one page in the Irish language. But what's happening with those particular phrases, like Erin go bra, Céad Míle Fáilte, which I'm pronouncing terribly, is that they become anglicized in their writing. So they've actually started to seep into American language as well and kind of become familiar. So that's the only biggest difference, is that the Germans still like writing in mock German, effectively. But good question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for your lecture. In your research, the 180,000 Irish who fought for the Federals, did you find that it was perhaps for the principle of union? Is there any evidence that there was sort of a strong feeling of abolition amongst the Irish?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in real honesty, brutal honesty, they're fighting for money, right? It's a good wage. It's $13. Plus you get your uniform thrown in because you're white. When they allow African Americans into the Union Army, they have to pay for that as well, out of their wages. So most of them are being really honest, they're using it for money. And that money is going mostly back to those who are back in the cities, the towns of particularly New York, Massachusetts. Some is coming over here. They also know they get a hefty pension should they die. And my really good friend, some of you might know him, Damien Shields, has done a lot about the pension files, about the fact that they're continually getting money out of that one as well. So then also it's that. But then it is, yeah, it's the United States is the Union. So it's like, we're going to fight for the home. There's an idea that if they fight, they'll be seen to be loyal, which means that they'll reap the rewards afterwards. And very quickly, in the kind of rest of the 1860s, 70s, the Irish diaspora rises. Even the lowest working classes rises in the cities. They take on very prominent positions, police, firemen, then politics, the rise of Tammany Hall in New York City. All of that is a kind of thanks, effectively, and also when everyone else just leaves them to it, effectively. So the Union is secondary. Abolition is tricky, right? So there's a misconception that they are all really racist and that they didn't want abolition because they didn't want African American slaves being freed to then take their jobs. That's what the draft riots is mostly about, to an extent. But that's a very minority voice. And as the war goes on, like quite a lot of normal American soldiers who similarly were doing it for money and defense of home, they actually realized, yeah, no, we're on the right side of history here. We should fight for this. And so abolition creeps in. And so even a song mentioned Pat Murphy's Mars Brigade, it talks about defending the land of the free. That is written after 1863. Once the Emancipation Proclamation comes out, henceforth forever freeing slaves in the at that point, Confederate areas, again, you can't change that. Lincoln's decided that. They know it will become an amendment. And it changes everybody's attitude. It changes the whole war's attitude. And so, again, it's another sign of them being American, becoming American, adopting those ideals. The new research I'm currently looking at is how Civil War memory forms around the 25th anniversary in the 1880s. The Irish rock up at their memorial services, particularly at Gettysburg, and start singing and writing ballads about fighting against slavery. They never used to do that in the 1860s, but 25 years on, they've decided that they're going to really latch onto it. The reason they're doing it, and it's what my research is looking at, is because Brazil is emancipating at the same time these anniversary commemorations are going on. So they've bought into the idea. But yeah, it's money. It's money to start off with.
Hi, you preempted my question actually in your presentation, and thank you for the presentation. The Fenians, there were a number of Fenians, including quite prominent Fenians, some Skibbereen, the Downing brothers, Dennis and Patrick, and Dennis was famous actually for the eve of Fredericksburg. He started singing Dear Old Ireland, and the story is that it went across to the other side, and both the Confederates and the Union sang that song before the battle. And there were others, Francis Welpy and many others, that joined the army primarily as a training ground, so that the idea that they would come back and use those skills to free Ireland. And was that mentioned at all in the songs? Or
Yeah, so for the ones that are written specifically by and about Fenians, that's very much front and center of their lyrics. It's that we're going to fight, and then we're going to take this and we're going to go back and do it. And so there are lyrics about how, their war service and stories of what they're doing in America should make Queen Victoria quake. It should worry Westminster. We're going to come back. Some of the prominent generals sort of talk about it in their speeches. But very quickly on, and especially after Fredericksburg, this big battle that happens in December of 1862, 45% of the Irish brigade is wiped out, both killed there on the battlefield on the 13th of December or through injury. The Irish brigade effectively for a while becomes in name only. After that, the attitude changes because they suddenly realize that if they're going to use this as a military training ground, they've got to survive the war unscathed. And some of the big prominent Fenians, or at least those very sympathetic to Irish nationalism, including the few young islanders who'd made it over to America. So, John Mitchell, you're going to hear about very different views on all of this, but Thomas Francis Meagher, they start to soften their language because they realize that actually they've got to survive. And if they're injured, there's no way they're going back because they're not going to be fit enough to do so. So it softens. What you start to see is a split. Famously, the Fenians split in the kind of 1866, 68 period. It actually starts during the war because lots of the guys who are sitting in the home front, they're sitting in Chicago trying to orchestrate the movement, are not realizing the reality of what they're experiencing. And of course, there is also that awkward, this is what got me into it, there is a slightly awkwardness which they're fighting to defend a union while very much wanting to separate another union. And they don't like the idea of secession. And so how do you square that politically? So what I talk about, there's a whole chapter of this in the book, so everyone should buy it, is about how you get general sympathy for the idea of Ireland being free, and it goes from we'll fight for it to then we'll get other people to help us fight for it. The Irish-American collective identity kicks in. They start saying about how we'll fight. They mean America and Ireland together fighting, but it becomes a kind of it's going to happen in the future. The lads who kick around in 66, 67, 68, they're a minority, and lots of the diaspora try and dissociate themselves with them and go, they don't want any repercussions in America about what's been going on, especially with the Fenian raids up in Canada. I mean, Thomas Francis Meagher tries to write to the Secretary of State going, I'm acting governor of Montana, I did not let them in, I promise you, it's nothing to do with me. So the lyrics reflect that change. There's a kind of the active support and the general sympathy changes effectively. There is also another song that's written near the end of the war. This is even a Fenian song, about realizing they can't do it alone. It talks about how if they're going to go back to Ireland, then a grant they will need. And grant in the song lyrics is capital G. They mean Ulysses S. Grant. In other words, if we're going to do it, we need to get the Union commander who's just won the Civil War to help us. I don't think that was what they would have wanted back in 1862, 63. The fact that they're actually having to, there's one letter talking about how we're going to have to pass a begging box to get help because they know they can't do it. Oh, they lose too many men, or too many men realize, yeah, I quite like it in America. I've got enough money now from my war salary. I'm going to settle. I mean, Corcoran, spoiler alert, Corcoran dies in the war. Not in battle. He falls off his horse and he hits his head. He hemorrhages. It's a really not great end for Corcoran. Marr survives, and of course Marr, big young islander, had been transported to Van Diemen's Land, had made it to America through escape, falls out with John Mitchell. You think he's going to be the one to lead them. Marr goes, no, I'm going to take every job that the Republicans offer me, and ends up in Montana, and then mysteriously falls off a boat. So we don't know what happened to Marr. He just falls off a boat. So yeah, the war songs are showing that there is tension there already, and so there might be this training ground wish, but very quickly the reality. I mean, this is a war that had been unlike any other at the time. This is a very brutal war. The Battle of Antietam in September 1862 remains the bloodiest day of the American history, effectively. Nothing else compares to it. The Irish are fighting there infamously on the Bloody Lane. That all has consequences for the realities. It's left to the next generation to pick up the pieces.
You focus very much on the north, and presumably that's where most of the Irish community. But there would have been Irish community in the Confederacy as well. Parts of Maryland, Georgia, Savannah, I think is supposed to have one of the biggest St. Patrick's Day parades. And you would have trade between the Caribbean, where there was an Irish presence, and the South. In terms of contribution to the Southern effort, would you make some comments on that, please?
Yeah, so the 20,000 Irish born and then a few extra descended second, third generation, they're mostly fighting in Louisiana, or in Louisiana regiments. New Orleans is a big port city, Savannah, Charleston, New Orleans. They're big port cities, so the Irish diaspora goes to them, a bit like how they've gone to New York and to Boston as well. And they are fighting. There's a group from Tipperary that are fighting in Louisiana, who have a couple of song lyrics dedicated to them. David Gleason's written a lot about this. He's a good colleague of mine who points out the fact that they're much more sporadically based around. So they have sort of units that have nicknames. So they actually called themselves the Tips, the guys from Tipperary. They had, before the war, lots of kind of Irish diaspora militia units, so there's a few Emmett Guards knocking around, but they get rid of that actually when they secede from the Union. All of those groups become more kind of Southern named units. So they're smaller, they are there, but they're very much showing that they have, again, been there for a decade or so and are fighting because everyone else in the Confederacy is fighting. It's very hard to escape if you're a white Southerner of any background, immigrant or non-immigrant, to avoid the war. I mean, you're drafted all the way up to about 45 by the end of the war. They're so desperate for men. So they're fighting because they're fighting, rather than fighting to defend slavery. Of course, there are plenty of Scots-Irish who are fighting to defend slavery, but that's a whole Margaret Mitchell gone with the wind tangent I don't want to get into. A lot of fake history. But yeah, so they are there, but they're just fewer, and they aren't sung about in the same way. But then Confederates don't sing about themselves in the same way. That's tied to the fact that Confederacy are trying to create nationalism while fighting for it. It's very complicated for them, but they're a small presence. But yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for an amazing talk, and also for being willing to step in
That's all
last
right.
minute.
That's all right.
Really, thank you very much.
Thank you.